What's up, guys? Today I wanted to talk about tracking your portfolio. It might be boring for some people, but tracking is probably one of the most important thing if you're farming concentrated liquidity pools. So before we begin, here's a quick portfolio update. You can see this dollar profit and loss just flipped positive. I'm beating impermanent loss by roughly 8,000 something dollars. So I'm up roughly almost $9,000 compared to holding in the market, averaging about $4,000 to $5,000 right now with the current volume and price appreciation. But the metric I prefer to track right now is Ethereum profit because I'm still running an Ethereum accumulation strategy. So 8.168 ETH on my open positions, roughly 7.7 ETH on my closed positions. And this number could shoot up really quickly depending on how some of these pools do. And you can see my strategies have been working, and a big part of it has been tracking the right metrics. Because if we track the right metrics, then that's the metrics that we're gonna optimize around. And so the plan is to go over like the common mistakes people make when it comes to tracking and give you kind of like what to do instead so that you could optimize your strategy and your tracking in a way that matches your goals. But before that, none of this is financial advice. Investing into crypto and concentrated pools is risky, so be sure to make your own decisions after doing your own research. So the main problem with a lot of these tracking softwares is that they track their profit and loss, their APR and stuff pretty differently. And if you don't know what to track, you could be in a loss without even knowing it. For example, this AIXBT pool that I just hopped in a few days ago, you could be looking at this and see that like, oh, I'm in a profit, right? A US dollar profit compared to the time I deposited, and versus holding, I'm up $162 as well. But if I click the details, you could see I'm actually down roughly $285 against Ethereum if I just held 100% Ethereum. And I actually care about this the most because I invested Ethereum into this pool. If I'm swapping in and out of Ethereum, but I'm not tracking this metric, then if I sold out of my position thinking that I'm in a profit, I would have had less Ethereum than what I started out with. And REKT does this really well, and REKT is free too. If you see the reference value, you could change to like versus holding. You could see I'm up in holding terms, US dollar terms, I'm up. But since again, I'm swapping from Ethereum and my goal is to accumulate Ethereum, I'm still at a net loss. But if I expect AIXBT to basically perform well in the next 6 to 12 months, this price would probably recover. My original liquidity would be at a positive Ethereum divergence loss, and eventually I would turn an Ethereum profit. And that's what happens with a lot of my pools. For example, this ETH to MOG pool, it was sitting in a loss for a while, and now you can see I have roughly 51% ROI on my investment. So I see this mistake all the time, even with people with years of experience in yield farming. They're farming crypto to crypto pools, and they're swapping in and out of the position with either Ethereum and Sol, but they're actually only tracking the US dollar profit and loss. So in this example, I would have been just better off using Ethereum to stake or lend rather than touching any of this higher risk yield farming strategies. And this is also the case if it's reversed, right? For example, this Arrow and ETH pool, I deposited back in February 4th. And during that time, Arrow and ETH was trading at a higher US dollar value. But if I go to REKT here, I'm actually in a slight profit in terms of Ethereum because I had some fees that I collected to make up for this divergence loss. And because some people don't know, right, they see this negative profit and loss, they might decide to cut their losses when in reality, they're not even at a loss. So again, the US dollar profit and loss for crypto to crypto pools typically is not as important in my opinion compared to the crypto profits you're trying to accumulate. And the second common mistake I see is that people are obsessing over this versus HODL number all the time. So when it's green, it means that I'm beating just holding these two tokens in the market. But again, like I showed, right, it doesn't show that you're actually at a net profit or a loss. And this could cloud your judgment sometimes, right? When it's time to take profit, but there's a lot of negative like versus HODL number. For example, this basis for every one token. If Coinbase lists this token, for example, and it pulls like a 20 to 30x, I for sure would have a huge number for the versus HODL because my tokens are in the liquidity pool earning fees. And if I'm just staying in range, trying to beat this number all the time, I might not be focused on actually taking profit on my positions when the opportunity comes. And here's an example of the position that I closed that's at like a negative versus HODL number, but I decided to take profits on it, which is not the end of the world, right? I still made 0.45 Ethereum on this particular pool. It just means that I missed out roughly 200 something dollars compared to holding, which is not too bad. But a lot of times if I'm in range for longer and the APR is pretty decent, like this Pendle and ETH pool here, you could see versus HODL is positive, and also I secured an Ethereum profit. So that's the best case scenario. It beats both. But in my opinion, this versus HODL number is not as important as this net profit. So we kind of talked about this already. The solution is to make sure you're tracking the metrics that you care most about. And usually those metrics would align to your goals. For example, if my goal was to actually accumulate AI XBT, then I don't mind like a negative profit against Ethereum because you could see my initial assets, I roughly have like 16,311 tokens of AI XBT, and now it's roughly at 18,000. And if I wanted to accumulate this token, then obviously I want to care more about like if this number is going up or not. And it works with every single pair, right? For example, Sol to Ethereum. If my goal is to accumulate Ethereum, then I want to make sure that I want to measure the profit and loss on Ethereum and maybe think about taking profits when the prices are good. But if my goal is to accumulate Sol, for example, or to make a US dollar profit, then that's the metric I want to track. And it also largely depends on which tokens you're swapping from. For example, if I'm making my investments from USDC and when I take profits, I'm withdrawing all of the liquidity and swapping back to USDC, then I would care most about the US dollar profit because we're not even thinking in crypto terms there. I'm trying to maximize that US dollar profit. And this is, for example, that's exactly my plan with this Bitcoin and Sol here. I deposit roughly like $10,000 worth of CBBTC and Sol when the prices were good. And now it's underperforming just holding these two assets separately by roughly only $40, but I actually don't care about it that much. If, for example, the profit and loss hits my target roughly at $5,000 to $10,000, I'm more than happy to take profits on that and sell everything back to USDC. So again, if you're swapping from USDC and your goal is to stack more USDC, then it makes sense to track that profit and loss in USDC terms. But if you're swapping from crypto to crypto, like if you're providing liquidity for Solana and you're trying to earn more Solana doing so, then you need to be tracking your profits in terms of Solana rather than US dollar. Because a lot of times it shows a negative profit and loss when you're running like a crypto to crypto pool. Because let's say you deposit up here when Solana was trading at like above $200, right? And Solana trended down all the way to sub $100, it would show a pretty nasty US dollar profit and loss. But at the same time, you could be earning Solana while you're providing these liquidity. And when Solana bounces back above $200, it's going to show a US dollar profit and loss again. So I wouldn't worry too much about the US dollar profit and loss if you're running crypto to crypto pools. If anything, you're trying to outperform just holding either Ethereum and Solana, depending on which one you use as your core asset to basically measure your profit and loss. And like I've said with a lot of my videos, is that the beating HODL number is secondary for me. For example, I'm beating HODL pretty nicely. But again, I care more about net Ethereum profit when I'm trying to accumulate Ethereum, and I would shift to valuing my profit and loss based on US dollar terms if I'm trying to accumulate more US dollar. And I probably need to make another video on this because it would go in pretty detail here. I updated this like at the end of last month. You could see it in this video here. But today's video was talking about tracking the profit and loss for each specific position and goal. But what you also want to do is track your portfolio in both like US dollar terms and crypto terms. This allows you to see like which tokens you're outperforming. For example, are you outperforming ETH? If you're running an ETH accumulation strategy, which in theory it should, right? Because you're trying to accumulate ETH. And if you did it successfully, then this ETH value would go up. Or if you're trying to accumulate more Bitcoin, is your portfolio rising in value against Bitcoin? And my portfolio right now is following an ETH accumulation strategy. And once it reaches like a good number and I'm trying to stack more US dollar profit, then I'm going to focus much more on this left chart here. But this month would probably be a great month for me if this move by Ethereum sustains here. When I updated it, Ethereum was trading only at roughly $1,800 something. But that's it for this video, guys. Make sure you're tracking the right metric that's in line with your strategy and your goals. And other metrics are also nice to look at, but they're kind of secondary to your main metric, which should basically drive like the main decision behind basically taking profits or cutting losses out of a position. And if you guys like this video, be sure to check out these other videos on my channel. It's going to help you become a better yield farmer, especially if you're farming with concentrated liquidity pools. Thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you guys next time.